So, Cliff, Lamb, what did you think?
I find it difficult to describe the experience of watching this film. You know, in the last half hour, I've been thinking about how to start summarizing what the experience of this film is like. And I actually find it quite difficult to know where to start, really, and in a really good way. I mean, I would say I thoroughly enjoyed this film and its surprises along the way. You know, it's a strange film because at one level it's very slow at times and but never dull. But then it kind of builds up to this really cool ending. I thought the ending was so, you know, kind of expected, but still quite shocking and unexpected. And I mean, right from the beginning, I love this. I love the opening of this film with the scene with the horses and, you know, a kind of POV shot of someone seeming to walk towards the horses and the horses moving and in the kind of fog. And then we move to see the sheep. And, you know, obviously we've just seen Cow and everything we talked about that and around animals in films and how compelling it could be. I mean, this film really captured the way the sheep were all looking towards the camera, you know, like looking at something. You really had that feeling. So it captivated me right from the start, I would say. And then as the story starts to develop and we get this kind of miraculous birth, you know, I was thinking, oh, this is like almost spiritual, you know, it's like biblical. My kind of opening interpretation of the film was that it was that took me by surprise because I wasn't expecting that from the little bit that I'd read on Mubi. That I mean, it definitely felt like there were almost obvious biblical references, and obviously the lamb being the Christ, and so, you know, but it never let me settle into that interpretation of it, because from quite early on we get the sense of this presence, of this kind of growling in the distance, you know, and this heavy breathing. We kind of know there's something, and there's something in the air right from the start. So I really liked this, that I was uncertain what I was watching, what genre this film was. And, you know, I thought it was brilliantly done in the, you know, the first third of the film. There's hardly any dialogue, but somehow there's so much that's said. So very little happens. We're actually told very little by what we see, but somehow there's a lot happening. And, you know, what I kind of really liked was that in that early section, because the humans weren't communicating with words for most of that segment, it was almost like the humans and animals were on an equal footing. I felt that the animals were speaking as much as the humans, you know, when we went to the scenes with the sheep or the dog or the baby even, you know. So it's like, I thought that was actually brilliantly done, in the sense of that without using any dialogue for big chunks of the film, it was actually saying a lot. You know, we knew that there was something weighing heavy in the air. We knew that there was grief or something, without it being ever having to be obvious at the start. So I was really impressed with that. You know, I kind of I was starting to make this kind of biblical, spiritual interpretation of the film, but, you know, then it kind of starts to turn into a kind of horror film or a comedy. I mean, at times it is comic. I mean, that kind of climax scene, I actually laughed out loud. You know, I was like, it's funny, but it's thrilling as well. It's a thrilling ending. But it made me laugh out loud. I really love the way it's shot. And one thing I really love in this, and I've done a lot of this myself with photography, I love when you get a picture within a picture. So there were quite a few scenes from inside the barn where it's dark, where there's just one square of where you can see the outside and you can see the green and the blue of the sky and the fields, and it's like a painting. And we get several of those, you know, and I just think they, you know, that's so interesting. I'm not sure what it really, whether it's got a significance. It probably does have a significance, actually, because it's so intentional. But then it felt like a little comic gesture. There's one time when the TV becomes the picture in the picture. And it's given kind of exactly the same status and the same colors as we see with when we're looking through a door from the inside to the outside. We get the TV where they're watching a film on TV. So I really liked that. If I was gonna make one criticism of it, but I'm not sure whether it's fair to do, because I have to believe it's intentional. You know, this film, I don't think this film settles into one genre. I think it's kind of quite playful, this film, in terms of, even though it feels quite serious at times, it's playful in terms of what it's doing. But I did feel that some of the early dialogue was very heavy-handed. You know, one of the first things that they say, it's not the first thing they say, I think, but where they are watching TV, and one of them says, "What was that?" and the other one said, "Oh, something about a folk tale." And I just felt that just felt clunky, because it's like, oh yeah, this is kind of, the whole thing's a bit of a folk tale. And then when they're talking about time travel, and he talks about kind of time travel going forwards, and she makes this comment about, and you can go backwards as well. And it kind of seemed to be too much about the grief. It felt like it was telling me so much, that film, without words having to be used, that when the words started coming in, they felt clunky. But, you know, this film was so well made. That probably was intentional, I guess. It's like, it didn't really ever want me to settle into kind of feeling like I understood what this film was. I mean, what's the message of the film? I don't know where to begin. It does feel like there's a lot in it. I mean, it's interesting. It's an interesting watch after Cow, because I think there is something here about the arrogance of humans, and, you know, in terms of thinking that human beings own nature. And obviously there's a lot about grief here, and it did make me think a little bit of Antichrist, and, you know, the chaos reigns idea. I thought it was a really compelling film, and I found the ending really rewarding in terms of it just being an entertaining movie. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, it wasn't quite the film I wanted it to be. In the end, it didn't quite work for me, this one. I really liked the opening as well, because it had, as you say, quite bold genre elements. There was like bells tinkling, and you're in a barn, and everything's stirring. And there was something I thought almost outrageously enjoyable about, you know, it's called Lamb, and the camera's focusing on the sheep, and it was almost like it was billing itself as a kind of Attack of the Killer Sheep film, you know, one of those sort of outrageous, in-your-face horror films. And that was the tone I was expecting and kind of wanted from it, and which it sort of tries to reclaim at the end. But that ending didn't work for me for reasons I'll talk about in a minute. But I also liked, on the same vein, the introduction to the third character was really ballsy and funny. You know, he's literally thrown out of a car in the middle of the street, as though the script is saying, and now we introduce a third character. And I really enjoyed that. But ultimately they didn't really do anything with him, and I was confused as to what his purpose in the drama was for. I mean, his function there was twofold. Firstly, he was there to sort of ratchet up some tension and some drama, and there were these moments between him and the woman, but none of it went anywhere. It just sort of fizzled out, and eventually he left on the coach. So I couldn't understand if that was a sort of misstep, if that was fumbled, or if I just didn't really understand the function of this character. But the other important thing he does do is he is the one who points out to them that this lamb child is a fantasy. You know, when he gets there, he sees with clear eyes, and he sees that they've just got a sheep in the bedroom with them, and it's just a sheep, right? And so that's a really important decision the film makes, because it very explicitly says that this is a fantasy and that it's just a sheep. It's not half person, half sheep. It's just a sheep. And so that created problems for me with the payoff, because the payoff then didn't make logical sense. It was like the simplicity of the setup: two people overcome with grief, pretend a lamb is a child, is complicated by the status of this monster at the end. Because if Ada as a child lamb is a fantasy, then the monster can't exist. But the film only works on an outrageous level if it's very literal, and it's saying this monster is real and it's just shot this guy dead. And so when it happened, I felt like I couldn't attach myself to it or really give myself to the ending, because I was too busy trying to work out the kind of mechanics of it. You know, what's the status of this monster? Is it real? Is it not real? And so I found that disappointing, because it has a really promising setup, very simple, straightforward setup. And as you said, I think that was a really nice point. I missed it, but it's I think you're right that the way there's this kind of this balance between the humans and the animals, in that there's almost no dialogue there. That's really clever and interesting. I was a bit cynical about the setup. I feel like I've seen a horror film that is really about grief. I feel like I've seen that quite a few times. You know, it's not a horror film; it's about grief. It's quite a go-to setup. And I mean, for me, the recent touchstone here is Hereditary, which I think is a fantastic movie. Not everyone loved it, but I thought it was brilliant. And as you say, Antichrist films like that. But the film sort of sits within a lineage. It's interesting because I recently went to see Romola Grai's Amulet, which is a similar film in that it's a stripped down, like folky horror film that depends on this sort of mad ending, real shock ending. And that film was really heavily influenced by Zawalski's Possession, which I think is like the grandfather of these freak out, crazy ending films. And they work because the ending grows organically out of the setup. And although you'd never be able to second guess it, when it happens, it makes perfect sense. And I was hoping and expecting the same thing here. I mean, it does a very good job of like making itself feel very, very ominous. You know something is coming. And then, of course, the dog yelps and you think, okay, here it is. Here's the payoff. And it was kind of what I expected the payoff to be. But as I say, I just couldn't work out the status of this monster. And so I found it ultimately a bit disappointing. There's lots to like. It's beautifully shot. The performances are fantastic. There's amazing landscape, terrific tracking shots with people running across fields with mist in the distance. So it's a really, you know, as I say, sort of elegantly stripped down setup by a filmmaker who is not afraid to say, okay, if we're working with conventions, let's put the conventions front and center and say, we're doing this bit now, you know, introduce the new character, this bit, and be really upfront about it, because that can be thrilling when it's executed well. So it's just a couple of things that were kind of fumbled for me, or that I didn't quite understand. Last thing I would say is that I see Bellatar's name popped up in the credits. I don't know.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, I don't know what he's doing there, but that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I did think about going back and looking up what the word, what his title was, what in what way he was introduced in the end titles. But yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I thought that's interesting about the third character arriving and the clumsy, you know, in a way it's a bit like the clumsy dialogue. It's like you get this thing that suddenly just is literally thrown in to the film. I mean, I hadn't thought of that, but that is interesting. It's like, and the thing is, he brings that sense of reality in. Where I think I disagree with you, for me, it's definitely not just the sheep. It is what you. I believe that it is what you see, and that's why the ending completely works for me, because that it's not just a sheep that they're pretending is almost a baby. I mean, that's why the brother says, you know, what the fuck is that? Because if it was just a sheep, I don't think his reaction would be quite as strong as it is, and I don't think he would feel the need to, you know, take it away and consider shooting it. I mean, I think he can see it's a genetic kind of mess, and so I guess that's in that way the film worked differently for us, in the sense of I believe that what we saw was actually, you know, it's a folk tale, it's a fairy tale. So, you know, you can have this odd half human, half animal creature. But I must admit, after the film, I was thinking, what was the purpose of him being there? And the fact that he obviously had a very shady, you know, the way he's delivered, he obviously has a shady past. Yeah, but you know, I guess in the end, it feels like it's just, there's a lot that's unexplained in this film, and so that's fine. It's an interesting kind of mix of things which together really worked for me. I really liked it.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly wanted to like it, but it's interesting that you read it as it was. That was literally because I thought if it's almost like the film kind of wants it both ways, because I mean, if it works, if it really is a film about grief, then it works better actually if the transformation of the child is symbolic, you know, if they've just sort of hoped and wished at her into being, whereas really she's just a sheep, you know. That's quite sad, and as a folk story I find that quite affecting, and that's where it worked best for me. But of course, if you go with that interpretation, that final monster doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, you know, you're not forced to read it one way or another, and I suppose that is a strength in the end.
Yeah. So I liked it more than you. I'd definitely give it 2 thumbs up.
I'd recommend it. I mean, it's strange enough to be enjoyable, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not too long.
No.
It's a reasonable time. Yeah. What are we doing next?
Well, next we're going to watch Petite Maman by Celine Sciamma.
Excellent. Really looking forward to that.